Hello, this is Mrs. Griner for another art masterpiece. I have something here that you may recognize. It's a dollar bill, isn't it? Well, I love going to the dollar store, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. There is a portrait of someone. Who is that? It's George Washington, that's right. Well, that's a famous picture. You've all seen it if you've seen a dollar bill. Well, we're going to see the original today. The artist's name is Gilbert Stuart. And did you know he painted this painting over 100 times? Here we have his name, Gilbert Stuart, born 1755, lived to 1828. He was known for painting portraits. Now, what is a portrait? Well, here we have George Washington today. But did you know that a portrait is a likeness of a person? It could be a painting, a photograph, a drawing, or a sculpture. In this case, we're looking at a painting with oil paint. Do you have any portraits in your house? We have one of our family, and then each person in our family. Did you know that a portrait not only shows what a person looks like, but it might actually tell you a little bit about the person's character traits? There's actually a special word for that, physiognomy, and that's describing maybe how the person acted as well. So I want you to look at George Washington's face. Do you think he was a silly person or serious? Do you think he was brave or scared? Was he good or selfish? Do you think he was honest or sneaky, trying to hide things? Well, if you said that he was serious, you're right. He took things seriously if they were important. And he was very brave. He fought in the French and Indian War, and he was a war hero, and then, of course, in our American Revolution. And he didn't even want to be our president at first. But people wanted him to be a king, and he said, I will be the president to keep the colonies, as they were at first, united, to retain the freedom that they had fought so dearly for. And he was a good and an honest man. Do you feel like Gilbert Stuart, our artist, captured those traits? Does he look like all of those things to you? Now let's look at what he's wearing. Do you notice that there's lace on his collar and on his, we would call it like a necktie or a neck scarf right here? If we can get a little bit closer, you can see that it almost looks like you could reach out and touch it. It's really delicately painted, and it looks just like maybe the real thing he was wearing. These would be like fancy dress clothes. So of course, this was done when he actually was the President of the United States. And I think I mentioned it, but I'll say it again. Gilbert Stuart painted this painting, or something very similar, of George Washington, his portrait, over 100 times. But guess what? George Washington himself never owned one. That's right, a lot of people were impressed or interested or admired George Washington, and so they wanted a portrait of him for their very own. And so they would commission Gilbert Stuart to paint them one. Now, did you know that George Washington had to sit for 10 hours? Can you sit for 10 hours? While Gilbert was trying to get his face just right, and his eyes, and maybe his hair. I don't think I could smile that long. That would be hard to do. In fact, he only had enough time to do his head, so he had another person come in and model or sit while he did the body, so like the coat and wearing all that. So it's interesting that it took so long because he wanted to be so careful with it. Do you think you would like to sit for a portrait like that? I'm glad that nowadays portraits don't take so long and we can smile. I like to smile in my pictures. I want to show you that actually Gilbert Stuart, as I said, he loved to do portraits. Well, he did the first 5 presidents of the United States. Do you recognize all of them? We have John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe. These are other portraits of our other presidents that Gilbert Stuart is also known for. Now let's take a look at the background. Do you notice how they're kind of similar? This is typical, and even nowadays, when you look at a background, it's usually the same. Look at your own school portrait. So it's kind of a brown, but there's like a light behind. So we have this lighter color here, yellow and brown mix, and then it gets more reddish brown, and then maybe a purpley blackish brown. Now, why would an artist choose to have the change in the background? I think it's for contrast and to highlight the brightest, lightest part of our painting is right up here in the white. The white of his hair is probably a wig. Back then, when you did a fancy dress portrait or went to a fancy party, the men and women liked to powder their hair or even wear a powdered wig. It was considered really cool and showed that you were important and that you had money to do so. It was the style. Think of it as hair gel, right? Or hairspray that we would still use with our hair. In any case, notice that the bright white, and almost maybe to show maybe a sign of wisdom, and that maybe he was very intellectual, very smart, and was able to really help our country through its earliest days. The forehead and the top of his head, he almost does look like a king. He's very tall as he's sitting or standing there, and he looks very wise, at least to me. And notice how his eyes are so penetrating. They're very confident. They're very steady. He means what he says, and he's going to do everything he can to do it. At least that's how I feel when I look at it. Well, I hope you enjoyed our portrait today of George Washington. The next time you sit down and want to draw something, maybe you'll choose a person. And will you try to use some physiognomy in it to make it not only look like the person, but maybe portray a little bit about how they act, how they behave. Are they a kind person? Are they mean? If you're doing a cartoon, usually they give angry eyes, right? Like a V. But if we're doing maybe more realism, a realistic portrait, perhaps you would put a furrow in their face. Or maybe someone is sad. Or maybe someone is very happy. In your case, if you're doing it from memory, you won't have to have someone sit for you for 10 hours, and you can give them a beautiful smile. Till next time, bye-bye.